The diaspora wars to diaspora dialogue. Exactly. We're doing like it.
Because the title of your book, I believe, is Sword and Money.
Kind of like, take away from the actual truths in it. But
I want to move on to the next
okay.
question. So go
Good
ahead. Tell us
evening.
your name.
Hi, I'm Zisa Aziza. So glad to be here tonight. I wrote down my thoughts, so I hope it'll be concise. This film was emotional, dynamic, and phenomenal. The epidemic of violence and the war on drugs appear to converge as tools of systemic oppression. It made me think of some connections between the police force, access to loans, business development, and quality schools as culpable and committed to systemic neglect, which creates an environment that becomes a war zone, such as what was depicted. For example, during the Biafran genocide in Nigeria, of which the Igbos were the target, the British provided the weaponry for that destabilization. Similarly, the Taliban and Hamas received funding from the same corporations and their lobbied governments, like the Bloods and the Crips. There are a few conspiracies, but a plethora of coordinated agendas to perpetuate, I'm almost done, and sustain.
I just want to have a question.
I do have a question.
Okay.
I'll land on a question. From my assessment, I believe the world hosts multilateral wars manufactured by entities without allegiance to life, liberty, or justice. Racism is a decoy of war. The effects are not a conundrum, but a custom. We may have lost Nipsey, but Terrence is still here. My last question, or only question. Julian, does Terrence receive any proceeds from your book?
Okay. Well, so I was just going to say that agreeing with what you said. I think the story ended up being really much of a story about structural racism. But specifically in the question, did we say 10% proceeds? You're beginning, right? We had no royalty check, frankly, because of the way publishing is. But yes, I do agree that he would get. And he's also, by the way, in terms of the intellectual property, if I were to send it for a movie, that would be 50% each. And so I was happily able to pay him for, even though I didn't want to pay him for being a source, I paid him for the archival rights to his archival footage. And by the way, I just had the rights. I don't own it. He owns it, but I wanted the right to show it in the movie. And I think that footage was amazing and incredibly dramatic, and was part of the reason I decided I had to do the movie. You probably remember the scene on Courts of the Young Boys, at least, by the way, are dead. But so much of that footage that captured the work Thomas was doing before the shooting, I thought was incredibly important to the story. And so, and by the way, on top of that, we have been able to thankfully make a little bit of money, not a lot, but even coming here and being fluent here and to be here with you and to talk to you. And actually a lot of events, sometimes we get a little bit of money, sometimes we get just a little bit of money, and sometimes I get $1,000 or something. And I'm setting up to really open it and make a little extra money that way. So that's how it's worked.
I want to add to that just really quick. Don't think that I don't understand racism, journalists depicting Black people and Latino people and people of color in ways that are very racist. Don't think I don't understand that, even though he's a white journalist and I trust in him. But I'm very happy with not being a producer. I really needed this to be a story outside of, because the whole thing in Denver would have been, it's only Terrence's narrative. And they still try to push that. But no, it's not my narrative. This is an independent journalist. And it just so happens I did not go to prison or they didn't murder me. That's why I'm sitting here right now, because he could be here by himself. Or I could have been like F. Julian and he could have been like, all right, well, the story's done. I'm going to Columbia by myself. If you don't want to go, fine, because I'm going to go. But I'm very happy with how it turned out. I have not made $1 off the book. I'm not worried about that. I have a job. I'm a property inspector. I'm able to pay my own bills. And I'm happy that I'm not a producer. I don't need a producer credit, but yet I'm sitting in the penitentiary. You know what I mean? Or they're spinning other 5 different documentaries saying, well, that was only Terrence's side. Let's tell this other slanderous side. So how everything turned out, I'm very happy with it.
Okay. All right.
Hi. Hi, my name is Zisa Aziza. This was really wonderful. It's really cold in here. so I'm gonna try and be brief. I was born in Staten Island to a Nigerian father. I was born with a Nigerian name. My mother's father is from Panama. I didn't learn this until I was 16 due to self-hatred. Okay? In the year of 96 and 97, my mother would say, take care of yourself, you African booty scratcher. Right? We're talking about self-hatred. So I bring that up because I appreciate what was said earlier in regards to the complicity with internal oppression as a form of being adapted as a safety mechanism in response to structural white supremacy. I want to acknowledge that and put space for that. But in addition to that is how do we internalize these things and then we become the slave master. And I think in regards to joy, and please help me understand if I'm correct, I think joy requires a reckoning with one's shadow, with the ways in which we have, seasoned the white supremacy and call it culture, and we wear dysfunction with pride, right? Like, how do we ground this joy that we're talking about? Because it really sounds like a rebranding of hope in the Obama campaign, personally speaking. Thank you.
All right. Question about joy. Share your experience. Did anybody want to take that? Yeah, I thank you for sharing that, sis, and I'm so sorry to hear about your experience. I feel like, it resonates deeply. And, I was invited to do this, article about my grandmother. And it was in the political magazine, and they had asked me, questions about where my first political home was. And I would always say MXGM, Copwatch, all that kind of stuff. And I really sat with it, and I was like, actually, Abuela was my first political home. And not because she knew Franz Fanon, she didn't. Not because she knew Fred Hampton, she didn't. But because she knew her name. And she knew her struggle. And she knew who her people were. When you asked her where she was from, she said, I'm from La Pedra. And I think that there's a part of that joy that you're talking about that requires us to be truth tellers, but also requires a reclaiming, right, of our histories, even if they were denied us. And so I appreciate you, because we do have to reclaim a lot, and there's healing in the reclamation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just so glad that you made that comment, because there's a sort of way that we don't address. I remember elementary school, and I remember the sort of cruel things. I remember the African booty scratcher comments to people. I remember, when, people calling people a Haitian as a diss. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't acknowledge that. Like, the first thing that we need to do is to talk about those things and to say, that hurt me. Right? Like, let's talk about the pain in order to get to a place where we can actually kind of get along and be for real about the building. I just wanted to say that, to appreciate that, and say that, in order for, we need to sort of be able to have those honest conversations around our pains that we cause one another, because they're very real, and they last. People don't forget. People really shed that a little bit. You know what I'm saying? There's a very, because we're not able to engage, or people want to dismiss it. And go, oh, you grown now. That was 20 years ago. I would be move on. But it's nah, that's deep. The pain runs very deep. And particularly when it's coming from, the calls coming from inside the house. When the pain and the struggle is coming from your own people, that hits very different. And I think that we do have to be able to talk to each other it wasn't cool. When people used to say this about me, without being dismissive of that. And so that we can really be able to, to find connections and be able to sort of celebrate one another in a very honest way. Not just in a little cheesy kind of oh, we love each other. But it's I deeply respect you as a human being and a person for all the elements, all your sides. In the same way that I tell people too, that when I the way that, people who are from the diaspora who live here sort of encounter all of these kinds of, I guess, it's ethnocentrism. And the same way, similarly, when I talk to, people coming from the continent, the way that they sort of, diss African Americans, and they have all these sort of super duper negative stereotypes of African Americans, we gotta be able to talk about these things, right? The way that these things are problematic, and that, how are we gonna coalition build if we still have these kind of inner resentments? Similar when it comes to colorism. Exactly. All of those levels, about what it means to be looking like this, have hair like this, and the ways that we hurt one another.
Yeah. Diaspora wars to diaspora dialogue.
Exactly.
We're doing it. Thank you.
In my research, I was working on When and Where I Enter, and Ida sort of came and sort of sat down on the page, and she said, these women you're writing about, they're important, but I'm really important. I'm at the center of everything. Follow me, and I will show you America. Follow me, and I will show you what we have to do. She is a kind of a prophet, not a prophet necessarily of talking about the future, but a prophet of telling us who we are, where we are, what we have to do. And she says, I will be the example, because I'm just not going to talk about it. I'm actually going to do it. Even I love that phrase that she says, even if the heavens may fall, and they did. She changed everything. She changed everything, and we're just beginning to catch up with her. And so she said, very simply in terms of her work, the people must know before they can act. And she was dedicated to us knowing what we needed to know to stay on this place.
I don't know where I am for time. Who's my timekeeper? Anybody? Okay, all right. Any questions from the audience out there? You said 5 to 10 minutes? I don't know where I am. I'm sorry. We went long. The thing that amazed me was that the whole campaign about a man was lynched today was based on her reporting, and she never got any credit. It was like she just totally erased. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is wonderful. Hi, Professor Giddens. I don't know if you recall me. Oyema, class of 22. Excuse me, class of 11. I apologize. Class of 11.
Okay.
Thank you for passing me in that class.
It's great to see you.
You as well. Thanks for passing me in that class, even though I didn't do the full 10 pages. I appreciate it. That was part of the revolution.
I have news for you. We've been reviewing some passing.
It's 13 years past, so we good. So I have one question for you, and I have one question for Woodson as well. Good to see you, my fellow aquarium. I did get your message from your assistant, so thank you for that. So for Professor Giddens, my question is, from a speculative speculation, if Ida B. Wells were to walk into this auditorium room right now, how do you envision her embodying her sword among lions?
How do I, embodying her?
Because the title of your book, I believe, is Sword Among Swords.
No, I remember.
So I'm gonna ask Woodson, and then I'll take a seat.
Okay.
So my question for Woodson is, have you discerned what compromises you will not acquiesce to in the pursuit of transforming your screenplay into a motion picture? If so, would you be willing to share? Would you be willing to share one hard line? I know you don't like explaining yourself, but a lot of things in academia are theoretical and abstract. So it's really lovely to hear very concrete things. Thank you.
You.
The question is, if she walked in the room.
Yeah, like how would she embody that energy, that vitality, that resistance in this space here? Because we are in the.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. But I know how she embodies the energy that we feel now without her work. One of the people who really helped me to understand certain aspects of Wells was Toni Morrison. And she said, she describes this, I wrote this, quoted her. She said, Ida Wells is like a ghost waiting to emerge, And so that energy which we all feel, that energy which has the Columbia School of Journalism having a whole symposium about her, it's more than just the things that she did, that she contributed. She's larger than the sum of her parts, I think. And so that's the sense we feel. Toni Morrison also said to me, she said, I'll always remember this, she said, when I mentioned my project, Ida Wells, she says, very casually, she said, well, Ida is important. I said, oh, Lord. I mean, I knew she was important, you know. But when Toni Morrison says she's important, you know, I told Toni, I said, you added about 2 or 3 years to my research. So, you know, let me make sure I know what you're talking about. So it's just a tremendous dimension and depth and centrality to everything, I think, to our culture and to our history, and certainly to the legacy of Black women. We feel it.
Good afternoon. Hi. I'm
Wait. There was
sorry.
a second
So,
question, Jackie. You gotta.
I
quit.
think the part about what I wouldn't compromise on. One thing that was asked of me is to make Susan B. Anthony a bigger character in the narrative, and I was like, nah, no, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
I really can't ask my question. It's hard to say no to you.
She's supposed to be upstairs.
I'll try. Yeah, I mean, I wrote it down.
You're a very busy woman.
Yeah. Just drop. They have my email. Just send them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, Earthrin.
Hi.
My name is Zisa. Can I ask you what your name means?
Nothing. My mother thinks she's creative.
Okay.
My mother's name is Anne.
Okay.
And she was determined that her children would never have common names. Our names are Earthrin, Tybra, Yvette Lorraine, and Zena with an I. Z-I-N-A.
I love it.
And we're in alphabetical order by birth order.
I love it.
Okay. She spent a lot of time. There are no other
Earthrin.
And the only thing that comes up is Earthrin. Is me. I tell people all the time, I am unique.
I think of your name as like your cousin of the earth, and the fact that you're working with the food system.
There you go. I like
So here's
that.
my
I
question.
often use
So here's my question. Why is the weaponization of food for subjugation in an international genocidal war different from the social determinants of health as a form of asymmetrical war as it relates to eugenics and racism?
Woo! That's a book.
That's a simple question.
No. And the reality of it is, let's divide it up, okay? The food as a weapon of war is a certain context of when food is used and how it is used. And the when you think about the food justice issues and food access issues
Totally.
I can give you a simple analogy.
Please.
I have no simple analogy.
If I have a table full of food, every kind of food, every kind of drink known to man, to humans. If you come to the table and you look different than me, that's okay.
Yeah.
You have plenty of food.
Yeah.
But if that food starts to get smaller, I'm going to turn to you and say, oh, I don't want to share with that person. You're black.
Almost.
I don't want to share with that person. They have a different religion than me. I don't want to share with that person because they have different. You will come up with reasons not to share.
It's really a rhetorical question. It is a rhetorical question, but you asked it, so it deserves an answer. And I would say your answer is correct, but I think that it is also the ability to control. Because food is so central to our needs, whether it's in a situation of war or a situation of racism and discrimination, the ability to use something that you know will affect everyone that you want to impact is the same in whether you're talking about a conflict situation or a community.
It's variations of imperialism. Can I share this with you? And I might email you, but I write it. So, yeah. And it was lovely meeting you.
You too.
Have a good one.
Take care.
Thanks.
If you cannot be a proper troll with your keyboard, perhaps show up in person. And when I use the word troll, I mean to antagonize what is clearly unwell, because it is like a fungus that is permeated in our culture, and somehow it is seen as superior and as civil and modern, but it is the most primitive aspect of man that seeks to conquer colonize, and annihilate, and then gaslight you when you say, hey, these things don't subscribe to divine law, to the logicality of a species that seeks to continue to exist in harmony with its environment. So I just ask questions, and you know, this is what it is. Very, very basic.